Our reporter Lape Olarinoye is at the Nigerian High Commission in central London, where protesters have gathered. And Lape, what's happening there?
Behind me here, we can see loads and loads of Nigerians who have come from far and near, living in the diaspora, that have come to share their anger, their rage and their emotions. You can hear them chanting here. We've seen so many different placards saying Buhari's a killer, Buhari's a terrorist, asking for the Nigerian government to be held account. Right now they're chanting justice because it seems as though a lot of the people here, even though they're across the pond, are still affected by this as to what happened yesterday night.
The mayor has expressed his concern at the need to act urgently, and that's because the infection rate per 100,000 people in London seems to be increasing. Currently, it's increased over a 7-day period from 18 to 25. If we look at other parts of the country, particularly in the northeast, the Midlands and Yorkshire, who have had more tighter restrictions imposed, London could also be added to that list, and the rule of six could be built on. We could see curfews being imposed on bars and restaurants. So it is a tough time for the government. They are facing mounting pressure, and that is because of the previous mistakes that were made during and before the last lockdown. And so to avoid the economy taking a harder hit, it would be a time for the government to be quite decisive.
Lape, the UK is one of those countries. It has a deal for 5 million vaccines from India. And the question everyone's asking is, should the UK scrap that deal and let India keep them?
Well, it's a really good question because really it depends, who's asking which side you're on. Many critics have said that this country has not finished vaccinating its young people, but although it's vaccinated its most vulnerable, there's still a long way to go, particularly for people under the age of 30. But we also know that they've overbought vaccines, particularly the AstraZeneca, which they've had an abundance of as a result of not using AstraZeneca for its younger population.
It's a stark difference to what it was like yesterday. Even yesterday wasn't a typical last weekend before Christmas, but there was a significant amount of people still present in comparison to today. If you just take a look behind me, you can almost see just a handful of people, not the typical amount that we're expecting on a day like this. Earlier, we spoke to some of these people that are on this strip. Many of them aren't shoppers, many of them are just coming to check if shops are open, which they're not. All doors to shops are closed, many of which are hospitality and retail stores, and including some people that we spoke to who are going into work because click and collect services are still open, and many people are still shopping online. Many of them expressed their frustration at the last minute changes to the rules. We are in the middle of a pandemic, and so that will change. The Prince Philip himself, the Duke of Edinburgh, said before he died that he didn't want to have a state funeral, and that's the information that we're getting from some of his close aides, and that would mean that he will be laid to rest at St George's Chapel and not given the typical lying in state funeral that a member of the royal family like himself would normally get. Now, a murder investigation has been launched into how this took place, and part of that investigation will try to understand how a firearm was smuggled into this building without the knowledge of the police officers.
Lape, this is a big shock for Chad because he's led the country for decades.
Absolutely, you're right. He's led the country for 3 decades and actually was awaiting election results, which are said to have 80% in his favor. So, of course, he was planning on going on to rule the country for, another number of years. But sadly, that's now been cut short. But it's really interesting to highlight what some people have described as a bit of a vicious cycle in the way his life has kind of ended. You know, he was once also a young soldier who also took power during a coup, which took over power from an armed government, a military government, and that's what's led to his ascension to power that he's been in for over 3 decades. And now himself on the front line has also been killed trying to fight yet again another insurgent and yet again another what many people again have described as a coup.
And what's really interesting about Black Friday is that although everyone is very excited when the day does come, it will be very interesting to see how people do spend this year, especially as we're in the middle of a pandemic, and many people's spending habits will have, or if not have changed already.
Lape, many thanks indeed.